So if it wasn't for my parents' hard grit, vision, we don't know the answer, but we're going to figure it out, that really helped develop my mindset to get to where I'm in front of you today.
Welcome to TTalks, where we dive into the stories behind the leaders shaping our world. I'm your host, Walia, and today we're joined by a remarkable individual, David Dame of Microsoft, who has continuously and continues to break barriers that are put in front of him. Dave, welcome to TTalks.
Hey, thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to this.
It's an absolute pleasure, Dave, and I'd love to get a quick intro in 30 seconds or so of what you do and what your role is right now.
What I'm doing right now is I'm leading the Windows and Devices portfolio for accessibility and human factors. So really what we're trying to do is make sure humans, both disability and not, are at the center of our technology. Because if it doesn't interact with humans naturally, it won't be as effective.
Amazing, and you're so right. If that integration isn't there, it definitely isn't effective. And we've got a lot of tools and resources that we have that we don't use because they don't work and flow smoothly with us. So I love that aspect of it.
In technology, right, we can fall in the trap of building anything. And when you're thinking about human-centered design, you're really trying to design it where, humanity and technology blends into one. And to your point, the more natural it is, the more effective it is, and more that it democratizes the barrier of utilizing all the great capabilities we have.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so before we get into the rest of our show here, David, I would love to understand something that I think a lot of us probably want to also know as well is mindset. I know you have a disability that you deal with, and you've had it since you were a child. How do you overcome all of that, especially from the mindset side of things as well? And how did you build that mindset to overcome this? Because you're clearly doing really well in terms of managing it, managing yourself, managing your career and your life as a whole. But that has to stem from somewhere. So I'd love to understand what that is.
I always like to say, if you can see a different world, then you'll have a different world available to you. When I was born in 1971, my parents were told Dave may not live past 12. Dave may never be able to speak clearly, if at all. And even if he does, don't expect much, because there's not much that someone like Dave with cerebral palsy can do. Sadly, they advised my parents to put me in an institution. Now, luckily for me, my parents didn't want to make the one decision that would impact the rest of my life. And it wasn't like they were visionaries or anything. They were very blue-collar workers, but they knew what struggle and grind was. And, if it wasn't for my parents that could see a different world for me, that would make the tough decision, and to be able to support me along that discovery journey. And if you think back to 1971, TJ, that was before disability rights even existed. But I couldn't have been born in any better time in history, because there was this new thing called technology that would give me a vehicle and a level-setting experience that people with disabilities in previous generations never had the privilege to use. So if it wasn't for my parents, hard grit, vision, we don't know the answer, but we're going to figure it out, and technology that was going to really make a huge benefit of reducing the physical mismatches that existed in the world, that really helped develop my mindset to get to where I'm in front of you today.
That's incredible. And kudos to your parents for seeing that. And to your point, 1970, that's a long time ago, where we didn't see the world the way we do today. We have our challenges today even, let alone back then. And, at least from a society perspective, we're a little bit more accepting and we're a little bit more accommodating per se. But back then it wasn't, forget back then, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, we weren't, right? So for them to make that decision and put you on a path of success and independence is just absolutely incredible, I would say.
Well, it had to be incredible. It had to be visionary, and it had to be scary because, when I was growing up through regular school and high school, and my parents fought school boards to get me in when they weren't ready to accept me. But a lot of times they needed to be the reality to me sometimes. I remember when I was done high school, I didn't know if I wanted to go to university for business because I was really good in it, or computer science, or take a year off and find myself. And with my dad being a blue collar person, he walked down the stairs and said, "David, let's be honest, with you being in a wheelchair, you're not going to be a fireman, police officer, or construction worker. But you know what else you're not going to be? Living under my roof for free the rest of your life. So you better figure it out." And then there were times where I would turn the tables and I said, "Fine, I'm going to go away for university 3 hours from where I grew up." And then he was like, "Well, who's going to get you out of bed? Who's going to, shower you and get you ready?" Because up until that point, my parents did all of my care in order for me to go to school and do those things. So now both myself and my parents, we had to get uncomfortable. And, I had to go and hire perfect strangers that I was going to interview one day and be completely naked in front of them the next day to dress me and shower me, really taught me how to be. There's not much more uncomfort you can embrace than that, and vulnerability to put your well-being into someone you just met. But I think it was those early seeds that really began to formulate who I was going to become as both a product maker and a leader, leading numerous people across a lot of organizations.
Again, it's incredible, and it's almost unimaginable in terms of what you've gone through. And I think something to share or highlight there, David, is that the conversation between your parents and yourself was very real and very positive and very uplifting. What was that like on the other side in, growing up in school and with, teachers not believing you have the abilities to do certain things and always, trying to put blockers up for you and barriers up for you. And I know you've overcome a lot of these barriers and you continue to do so. I'd love to understand that, because I don't think a lot of people understand when someone is judged by a disability or an appearance, and the barriers that we put in front of them can really have a detrimental impact. I'd love to understand a little bit of that from you, David.
That's a fantastic question, and I don't think there's a simple answer. So let me draw some shades. So I think part of it was I had to educate myself on how I was going to operate in a classroom, because I couldn't handwrite that well or write by hand recursive writing for a long period of time. And computers weren't on every desk at the moment, so I had to use a typewriter to begin typing my notes. So I had to figure out how to blend in to a world that wasn't set up for me. How would I do math? I had to learn to do it in my head because I couldn't really line the numbers up on a typewriter to do that. And then after educating myself, I had to educate the teachers on, wait a minute, think of a new way in which you can interact with me to evaluate me and get the most out of me. And I had to lead that. So I had to lead the change for myself. I had to lead the change for the teachers, not to mention I had to educate my fellow students on what it was like to interact and play with somebody with a disability. Because for all of us that went to school, I think some of us, maybe a bigger number than we like to admit, were bullied growing up, right? Because kids don't understand. And so I had to go through my share of bullying. I had to go through some teachers that were self-doubt. And I also had to deal with myself when I would come across self-doubt. So trying to manage those three things at 12 years old is really, now looking back on it, seems so overwhelming. But at the time, you're just focusing on, look, I want to get through school. I want to be able to graduate. I want to go to high school. And when you start out younger, you just mostly want to be with your friends, right? Your peers and everything, and to fit in and all that goodness, because being born with a disability, and I was really considered unique, where my mental capacity and IQ were off the charts. So I really didn't fit into the disability community locally around me, but nor did I fit in the regular school system. And not to play the ugly duckling kind of syndrome, I just didn't know where I existed. And not being able to talk at an early age, because I couldn't talk, believe it or not, clearly until I was 10 or 12, kind of
Wow.
getting in there. But what you do get the opportunity to do is learn and observe humans. How do they interact with each other? How do they react? What triggers them? What motivates them? So, in one vein, you can look, it was sad that you couldn't talk, but I see it as a benefit that I got the opportunity to be able to really observe human behavior and begin to see the world differently, right? Of, wait, we all get through things, but how do we react? We all might have a disability, whether the common definition of disability or abstractly challenges. And, what is that human aspect and mindset that differentiates between whether you call it a day and give in or persevere going forward? And being able to observe many, many people in similar but different situations really helped me understand and grow. And so when I was able to communicate more clearly, easily, and effectively, I was able to use my senses to be able to kind of empathize with them, to be able to connect with them in a higher impact. So I think all of that upbringing was kind of early on, really kind of made me realize the world can always change. Just because you don't see it today doesn't mean it's going to exist in the future. And to have the confidence and humility that you're not going to get it all right the first time, maybe not the second, but maybe the third, maybe the fourth, but continually being resilient and looking for alternative ways to do things. My parents had to learn, because I had an older sibling, I couldn't follow their path because they got to go through the path everybody knew for someone that wasn't disabled. So my parents had to find a new path. I had to find a new path. And then if you look at today's world of business and corporations, those skills got to get me to be able to see, where does the business need to evolve to? How do they need to adjust? How are humans changing? How does our customer needs change? Our users change needs? And when you're being conditioned to be able to know what you see today isn't going to be what you see tomorrow, you begin evolving that toolkit. And it's a rare thing, I think, you find where the things you've done in your life reflect what you get to do and get paid for as a professional. And I think I don't think I would be who I am without my cerebral palsy.
That's very deep, David, in terms of, the journey and the factors and putting everything together to make you who you are. And, to your point, there's a lot of things that you touched on there, but I think the self-doubt one, right? It starts from within. A lot of us individuals face self-doubt on a day-to-day basis. I learned the term,
To get comfortable at being uncomfortable.
well, there's that one there, but there's another one when you're so successful at something, but there's self-doubt about yourself. Like, how did I get here?
Imposter syndrome.
Imposter syndrome. That's it. You got it there. That's it. And so I learned that for the first time when I joined Microsoft, and I, spent about 15 years at Microsoft. And I was like, how did I end up here? How did I do this? And I remember at one of our AGMs, there was an Olympic gold medalist who was brought in, and she spoke about her experience and how she had won, 2 gold medals, I think not 3. And she said she had imposter syndrome where she would actually go into Lake Ontario and be on her own, and she would scream really loud just to let all this frustration out, because she didn't know how she got there, but she couldn't go in front of a camera or anyone else and say, this is what I'm feeling. And that's when it clicked in, like, this is normal. So for you to learn how to overcome self-doubt, right? Like, that's phenomenal for you to not only deal with the external factors, but there's the internal factor of, hey, maybe I can do this, maybe I can't, because everyone's telling me I can't do this, but you're going in with, you know what, I'm going to do this. But how did you overcome that self-doubt? I think that's the big question there.
I don't know if you overcome self-doubt or you just learn to deal with it. I think I still have self-doubt to this day, but you can either let self-doubt stop you from taking a chance, or you can use self-doubt to begin to give yourself forgiveness, right? Because I think we're all human, right? To be able to sit back. My dad passed away right after I got done university, so he didn't get to see what all his sacrifices he made did. But, but I think I deal with it every day. And what I try to do is just kind of going, okay, this is something different. What advice would I give someone on my team that reports to me? Because, as leaders and coaches, we're great at giving advice. Sometimes we don't take our own advice. So I'll be like, okay, this is something new. What can we do to experiment? What can we do what does success look like? And if I get it wrong, so what? How do I react to that? Right? And I think that's the two things is, are you comfortable enough to make a mistake? And how do you react when you do mistake or fail? And so I think dealing with self-doubt is you remind yourself of previous impossibilities that you take for granted, but you allow yourself to be a learner all over again. Like when I first learned math and made a mistake, I was like, oh, that's part of the learning process. But as you get to be a professional and climb up the ladder, you start to realize, or you start to think rather, maybe I can't make mistakes now. Maybe the pressures maybe somehow I conned everybody and I ended up here. But you learn that you got there because of your mistakes, not because of the avoidance of it. So I looked at times where I had to learn to type, had to learn to use a typewriter, had to learn to use technology, had to learn like how to turn on the lights, learn how to do and I've been able to overcome them to live independently. Why wouldn't I use that same mindset and attitude to address this professional and career challenge and be able to do that? And, I think when you grow up more, like with a disability, I spent a big part of my life not even thinking I have a disability, right? Sure, I used a power wheelchair, but I was almost trying to wrongfully separate myself from other people with wheelchairs and disabilities because I was afraid of the stereotypes and the generalisms that would be, and the self-doubt that maybe I would add to myself. But then when one of my people that were on my team, they said, we don't follow you because we don't think you struggle with things. We follow you because despite your struggle, you continue to persevere, and you made me a better human and a better person, not even reflecting back on the work they're doing, but who they become. And you don't realize when you're facing self-doubt and challenging it, you're not only doing it for yourself, but there's also people that are around you that are getting something from it, that they're using it to grow themselves. So I think we never get over self-doubt, but we get comfortable at facing it. And then the more we do things, the easier it is to become. The more it is where you realize that it's not getting it right the first time, second time. Don't make the same mistake over and over again because that's silly. But learn to make new mistakes, new tests, new challenges, and take comfort on what you've done in the past to motivate you to be humble enough to face those challenges in the future.
I love that, Dave. I love that. And I know you touched on failure there as well. One of the things that I do with anyone I'm working with, or even my kids, is to use the word fail as it stands for first attempt in learning. So this really encourages you to make mistakes. But I also love that you said, don't make the same mistakes over and over again. Make new mistakes, because that's going to help you grow and develop. How's that aspect of failure been in your life? So you're encouraging it, you're doing it, but sometimes it does lead back to, am I doing the right things? And then that leads to what you mentioned earlier, getting uncomfortable, right? Seeing people judge you based on making mistakes versus saying, this is what's helped me grow and develop and become who I am. Your perspective there, Dave, really quickly.
It's interesting, right? So you and I can talk failure in a personal, individual, human level. When you kind of enter the corporate world, failure is treated differently. And I know a number of years ago, leaders were starting to go fail fast and fail often.
Yes.
And then when you would go, okay, share with me some of your failures. Oh, not me. Like, it was, sometimes disingenuous. And I think you were alluding to it, is if we refer to it as failure, that's a terminal state, right? Like, you think of it as you fail, you're done. Back in school, right? You either pass or fail a test. But if we can change the word failure to learning, because I've learned more from my mistakes than I have from confirming I was right. You start changing the narrative, you start changing the language. And I think when you're trying to get, when you're being aware of, is your failure going to have an impact to others? Meaning, are you going to be judged wrongfully for it? Are you going to prove them right? Somebody with a disability can't do that. What I've only come to learn recently, and it's great as you get older, you wish you knew stuff way before, is it's how you react to those failures or mistakes or learning opportunities. If you get all upset and distraught and going, oh, I failed, this is everything, this is upset, that's what people absorb in your mistake, not really the mistake itself. Whereas if I said, darn, I made a mistake, now here's the insight I gathered, here's what I need to know ahead of next time, and show how you're reflecting back on it to be better going forward. I think people that are perceiving you judge that positive reaction more positively than if you just kind of overreact, give up, and act like self-doubt. If you show that, yep, I made it, you can show you can own your mistakes or understand your own vulnerability, but then you're ready to think about what can I try differently? Or what do I know now that I didn't know before? And if I'm faced with this again, what should I learn before making a decision? Who should I consult with? Because in the workplace, we try to think of it as an individual sport when it comes to our career. But what I've learned as the fortune that I've gained to lead so many people is if you make if you make success a team sport, you're able to learn from one another. And especially as you younger in your career, you look and you get great people you can learn from above you. But as you get older, it's not as much pickings up top, and you really need to look within your team now to go, what can they teach me? What can they learn? Because we always assume learning is vertical, right? You learn from above. But what I've learned is you learn from everything all around you, from your team and everything around you. So when you try to shift it from individual to group and to team, at least it makes you realize you're not alone.
Absolutely. And learning from all around is so critical. I remember when I first started at Microsoft, I was relocated to Edmonton for my career journey there. And the individual I was replacing, unfortunately, was let go for certain reasons. And I went to my hiring manager, my manager at the time, and said, her name was Kim. I said, Kim, what did that individual do that I shouldn't be doing? Right? Like, let me know. Like,
Find out.
yeah, exactly. And I said, I'll figure out what the role is. I'll figure out what I have to do. But what were the 3 or 4 things that individual did? And she came back and she said, wasn't responsive, wasn't talking to their customers, wasn't present, whatnot. Gave me a list. And I said, those are the top priority things I am not going to do. So to your point, you have to learn from not only the good people around you, but also the not so good people around you, so you can also improve and stay afloat, essentially. One of the things that David, you spoke about on one of your blogs is setting unrealistic goals, right? I think that's a factor that a lot of people don't do. We do goal setting and we talk about making it achievable and making it manageable and measurable, all of that. Help me understand that a little bit, because that's a different take on what everyone is told to do for a goal.
Well, think about the start of my life. If you said in 1971, this person with cerebral palsy will be able to lead a lot of products to market, will become a great leader at one of the major banks of Canada, and then eventually move to work with Microsoft worldwide, people would be like, sure they would. If we went back in history before flight and said, there'll be a time where people are going to buy tickets to get on a plane to fly around the world as a consumer, you'd be like, get out of here. I think when we set goals in the traditional way, like you said, measurable and all that, we're only setting goals for our comfort zone and what we know, right? Because if we can measure it, if we can do all these things, I challenge, is it a big enough goal, right? Like, and like years ago, I did a 5K walk to raise money for Terry Fox and for his annual campaign. If you would have said, if you would have asked me even, would I be able to leave my wheelchair and walk 5 kilometers with others and raise money? I'd be like, get out of here. So I've learned, if you want to achieve big things, you got to set unrealistic goals. And it gives you the forgiveness. I might not know how I'm going to achieve it. I don't know if there is one way I'm going to achieve it. But by setting something that has so much unknown, it also provides you great opportunity and possibility to try many different things. So I always try to set unrealistic goals in a way to move that North Star. We only have one life. We only have this one opportunity. Do I want to say, I've shown 27% growth? Or do I want to say, I'm in a position that me and my peers in the world would never thought of, And now that I get to empower and impact others to be able to even leapfrog me at some point, that is a story I want to tell. So I think when we can set what we see as an unrealistic goal, because all my unrealistic goals were simply just a moment in time. And then today, that unrealistic goal seems to be one of the great achievements that we're talking about today. So today's unrealistic goal is tomorrow's amazing achievement.
That's incredible. That is incredible. And just to continually push yourself beyond the limits. You said it really well that we've got one life and that's all we've got. So what are we going to do? Sit around and let it go, or are we going to make something of it? And this is exactly what I tell, those around me as well. Is like, we've got one shot at this. Let's make it right. And what are we afraid of? Of someone else laughing at us, which they're going to do regardless. Let's call it for what it is.
For sure.
And so if they're going to do it, then let's make it happen the way we want it on our terms. So I love that.
But when I started grade school, right, where people wouldn't even interact with me, like I'd be like, am I going to get girls to like me and date? And this year I'll be celebrating 20 years of marriage with my wife. And
amazing.
I would have never thought I would find somebody to love me for all my insecurities and differences. Because, I believe every female grows up thinking of their significant other coming in on horseback to swoop them up. They never think they'll be rolling in a wheelchair to go, and to be able to say that someone fell in love with me, or we fell in love and we were imperfectly perfect for each other, and to be able to share these milestones and journeys with. It's even made those unrealistic goals to previously, when you have those great achievements to share with someone special, that just makes a greater impact.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And just sharing that journey is part of it, right? Rather than having yourself thinking, oh, maybe I've achieved this, I've done it, but for who? But when you have someone rooting for you every step of the way, and there are going to be days that you have that self-doubt, that someone can just say, hey, you know what? You've done all of this before. This is just one more. Let's go, right? So that makes that much of a world of a difference. David, I guess my last question before we go into our rapid fire segment is, how can society be more inclusive and supportive of individuals with disabilities? Because we're quick to judge, we're quick to make decisions or assumptions. What is a piece of advice that you would give people and our listeners to say, you know what, maybe hear someone out or give them an opportunity? What does that look like from your side, David?
This might seem very basic. Simply talk to them. I had someone last year, I've been at Microsoft 3 years now. They said, Dave, I've wanted to approach you the last 3 years, but I was just afraid I would say the wrong thing. And I said, really? I go, it's better to say the wrong thing than nothing. So just reach out when you see someone with a disability, have a conversation, be curious, find out who they are. If you can simply do that, everything else will naturally fall in front of you on how to be more inclusive. And if you're a company, what I've been sharing with a lot of companies lately, don't simply just hire somebody with a disability. Remember, you got to grow them within your organization, because I think a lot of organizations try to check the box at hiring. But it's only if you can grow them. And to be honest, most of my career, I never got the chance to grow into a role. I had to become very good, an all-star, and get poached by another company. My career path was made from just being very good at it and being poached, rather than an organization growing me internally and retaining that great talent. Because as you grow people with disabilities, you really influence every level they grow into, to understand. And, even though I've only been in accessibility for 3 years now, despite, a whole career of technology, it's not lost on me that I've been able to influence senior leaders because I was the first person they met that was like them with a disability. Sure, they might have had family members that had a disability or somewhere deep down low in their organization, but usually I'm the first one at the table with them. And when they get that direct exposure, understanding, and to be able to see the overlap of we're more alike than we are different, it really begins to shape the organization to be more inclusive. And it starts with conversations. It's getting invited to their house for dinner and meet their family. It's really separating the perceived differences and just starting the conversation to really glue and cement and do things more together.
I love what you said there, just having that conversation with them to really understand who they are and what they're all about. And the last point you made there is that there's more similarities than there are differences. Very, very strong point there as well. And that's what we have to look at and embrace. And I think, the conversation that the individual had with you, that they were afraid that they might say the wrong thing or offend. But the way I look at it is, I met a gentleman just a couple of weeks ago outside the Loblaws, in a wheelchair. He was alone. He put himself in the driver's seat in the minivan and then grabbed his wheelchair from the other side and then put it back in the car. And I approached him and said, do you need any help or can I help you with anything? Be curious and ask the question rather than trying to force something on them, assuming that they can't do anything. And he said, no, I'm perfectly fine. Thank you. And that was the conversation there. But being respectful and kind and caring doesn't have to be by going and doing something for someone, but it's just being curious enough to ask and help in that regard. And if they need the help, they will ask. And if they don't, they will tell you as well. And that's been my experience where I look at those opportunities and just be curious and ask if they need and ask for permission before going around and doing things on our own.
And with everyone, when you have a conversation with them, you learn. Conversations are opportunities for learning and understanding and connecting. So it's something we take for granted. Simple conversations opens the door to so many other things.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Amazing, David. David, it's time for a rapid fire question segment. It's basically, I will ask you a question and the first thing that comes to mind, let's fire it away and see what that looks like. Are you ready?
Let's go.
All right. We'll start with tea or coffee?
Neither. Water.
Water. Okay. How do you disconnect?
Music.
Music. Okay. One thing on your bucket list.
I think I already did it last year with scuba diving. So let me think of, or not scuba diving, sorry. I did, with my cousin, I got to go scuba diving and it was a phenomenal experience. So if I had to set a new bucket list, it would be visit Europe.
Okay, very cool. Very cool. Favorite book or movie?
My favorite movie, Boiler Room.
Okay, Boiler Room. And if you could learn a new skill instantly, what would it be?
I would love to be able to sing.
Sing. Okay, very cool. And last question. If animals could speak, which would you want to have a conversation with outside of any pets you may have?
I would like to have a conversation with the giraffe to truly understand how they interpret the world up there.
That is very cool. David, thank you very much for being here. It was an absolute pleasure to have you. Your story has been very inspiring, and I hope it inspires the lives of many others that are going to be listening into this episode. So thank you very much again.
Thank you so much, TJ, for having me.
Thank you again, David, for sharing your valuable insights and your inspiring experience with all of us today. It's been a true pleasure. To our listeners, thank you very much for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe to TTalks for more conversations with the leaders who are shaping our world. Until next time, keep on inspiring.